Hi. This past week you should have been looking at part 3 of the course, and that would be the spine. And I want to take a few minutes now to kind of go over some of this material so that you have maybe a better idea or clarification of what it really looks like. Here's a model of a spine facing you. These are the bodies, and so these are anterior. The spinous processes in the back here, those lumps along the back part of your back. And so we have an anterior portion, we have a posterior portion, which are the spines. Now, each of these has a vertebrae. And remember, the vertebrae has a body, and it has a spinous process, and it has a transverse process there, and it has this connection here between the transverse process and the spinous process. This is the lamina, and then it has the connection here between the body here and the transverse, and that's the pedicle. Okay, so this is anterior portion. This is posterior. Now, one of the things that we've talked about here are the facet joints. If we look here at the lumbar spine area here, there's the there's the spinous process, and if you look here, you see the movement there. It goes right there. Right in here, you begin to see some movement. Okay, that's movement at a facet joint. It's made up of a this inferior articular process and the superior articular process below, and they match and they form that joint, and that joint has motions in it. I think you can see partially as I bend this. Okay? Those are movements occurring at the facet joint. Okay, see, I'm going back and forth. All right. Now, holding this all together, we have a group of ligaments. Now, there's one ligament that runs along the front portion here of the spine. So anterior, it's a long one. It runs a long ways up from this occipital bone all the way down to the sacrum. So this is the anterior longitudinal ligament. A very, very strong ligament, a very important ligament. Okay? Now, when we look at the area of the vertebrae, again, we said this is anterior. So we flip it like here. Here's the anterior portion here. Now there's the posterior part of the vertebrae body. Running in here is where you have your posterior longitudinal ligament. So the anterior longitudinal ligament is out here. The posterior is here. Sitting in that hole is the spinal cord. Now here are the lamina. There's the spinal cord here. There's the lamina. All right. Now, attaching to the lamina from one vertebrae to the other is the ligamentum flavum. The ligamentum flavum is an elastic ligament, and it goes from one lamina to another lamina to another lamina to another lamina. Okay? So we have in this opening here, on one side we have the posterior longitudinal, on the other side we got a ligamentum flavum. Now, if we have degenerative disc disease, the two vertebrae come together, and I think you can see how these two ligaments might begin to buckle and put pressure on the spinal cord. That happens, we see that clinically. Now again, here's the outside spinous process. So we're going to go back to the big model here. All right. There. And here's our spinous processes here. And we'll come back here to the area down in here with a little bit more space. Now, there are two ligaments here. One runs between the spinous processes, and this is called the interspinous, as my fingers are. And one rides above the spinous process. It's called the supraspinous, superior to the spine. Right? Now these go all the way down to the lower lumbar region, and as they come up, they stop, though, over here at the 7th cervical vertebrae. Okay? So from C7 down, we have supraspinous and interspinous. Up here in the neck, we have another ligament called the ligamentum nuchae. All right? And it goes from C7 up to the occipital bone. So here we have ligamentum nuchae, and then down here we have supraspinous and interspinous ligaments. Now, in this area here, we also have muscles. We have a member of several types of muscles. There's a superficial group, and then there is a deep group. The superficial group acts on the scapula, attached to the scapula, some of them attach onto the humerus, and they are involved with upper extremity motion as well as movements of the spine. Trapezius, for example, latissimus dorsi, rhomboid major and minor, levator scapula. All of these are these superficial muscles. They are all innervated by ventral rami. Now you remember that section on the nerve, we had a spinal nerve coming out and dividing into a dorsal ramus and a ventral ramus. That ventral ramus goes to the body and goes to the trunk rather, and also to the limbs. That dorsal ramus comes along here along the spine. And so when we remove those superficial muscles, now we begin to see the deeper muscles. And those deeper muscles are all innervated by the dorsal rami. Okay? So one of the major components of these deep muscles is the erector spinae. And it has three parts. There's three parts on each side. One part goes from the ilium onto the ribs. It's called the iliocostalis. Okay? Another part, which you find mainly up in the thoracic and cervical region, runs right along the spinous processes. So it's called the spinalis. So we have a spinalis on this side, we'll have a spinalis on this side, we'll have an iliocostalis on this side, and one on the other side. Running in between is the long one. It's called the longissimus. It's all the way lumbar, all the way up into the neck and into the head. Okay? Those are the erector spinae muscles. Now in the neck region, at about the same level of the erector spinae, we also have a set of muscles on each called the splenius muscles. There's a splenius capitis and a splenius cervicis here. Again, dorsal rami on each side. Okay? Now, when we remove those deep muscles, now we come to another set of muscles. These muscles are called the transversospinalis group of muscles, and there's three of them. On each side, there's a muscle called the multifidus. And the multifidus is really very large here. It covers the whole sacrum, but then moves up along the spines deep, along the vertebrae, all the way up into the neck region, called the multifidus. Also running in this deep area are what we call the rotators. We have the rotator longus and rotator brevis. The longus crosses two vertebrae, the brevis only one, and the name tells you what they do. They rotate. Okay? The next group is in the neck primarily. It's called the semispinalis capitis. Semispinalis, cervicis and thoracis, and it sits under the splenius capitis and splenius cervicis way down here in the deep neck. Okay? Now, if that wasn't enough, there's still one other group. And that other group is up here in the area under the occipital bone, right there. Okay, very, very deep. Okay, and it's called the suboccipital triangle, suboccipital region. And there's several muscles there. There's two rectus muscles and a couple of oblique muscles. But the one thing that's important is this artery runs through that. If you look here, you'll see the artery coming through the transverse foramen. That's the vertebral artery. The vertebral artery is one of two major arteries to the brain. The other one is the internal carotid. This comes up and it goes to the top vertebrae C1, the axis, crosses over the axis, and then goes in through the foramen magnum. That crossover right there is in the center of that suboccipital triangle, which makes it a very important area. The other thing that's in this area here is a nerve called the greater occipital nerve. We'll talk more about it, but it's a nerve that goes up to the back of your head, to the skin. And it passes through the trapezius, it passes through the semispinalis capitis, and so when you have tension and you're like going, those muscles tighten, and they tighten and they put pressure on that nerve, and you begin to get a tension headache, which runs along the back part of your skull. Now, running with that nerve is an artery. It's called the occipital artery. So if it's bad enough, the tension, you'll also have a throbbing headache because of the artery. So these are things we'll talk more about, and you'll hear more about next term. But hopefully this gave you some idea that what's going to happen, and a better handle on this. Next week we'll take a little bit more look at the brachial plexus and at the arm.